For today's midweek lesson, we're going to be looking at the beginning of John chapter 10. There's some interesting wording in there and thought it might be worth going through. I'm just going to go ahead and read a couple of verses here and then we'll talk about that. This is Jesus talking, starting in chapter 10, verse 1. Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought them out all on his own, he goes ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice, but they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. So Jesus is talking to the Pharisees here, and he gives some description of how things worked with sheep at the time. And of course, we know Jesus isn't giving us a lesson on sheep. He's explaining how that works to show us how something else works. And in fact, he even comes right out and says that in verse 6. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Well, here's the thing. The Pharisees often got a lot of things wrong that Jesus said because they were prideful and they wanted it to mean something else. But this is a passage where a lot of times we get this wrong too, or many well-meaning Christians get this wrong because it can be a little bit confusing. I read a number of different interpretations of what Jesus was talking about here when he was mentioning the sheep pen, and read a few of them that just didn't seem to line up with each other. A popular one would be a teaching that Jesus was referring to the sheep pen, or when he was talking about the sheep pen, that he was actually referring to heaven. And so he's explaining here, nobody can get into heaven except unless the shepherd lets them in. And if Jesus is the shepherd, then that's what this would be talking about. The only way to get to heaven is through Jesus. The problem here is that's a very biblical application that's correct in concept at least, but I don't think that's what Jesus is talking about here. That lesson shows up elsewhere in the Bible. Here I think Jesus is talking about something different. There's also some interpretation here about false teachers and it being something against them because Jesus was talking to the Pharisees. But again, contextually, that doesn't work too well either because those guys were appointed for the job they were supposed to have. We don't need to get into the details because I don't think it's the correct interpretation in the first place. So what exactly then is Jesus talking about? I think what he's referring to here when he's talking about the sheep pen is, I believe he's talking about the nation of Israel. So let's go back and we'll look at this part again with that understanding. Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate but climbs in by some other way is a thief and a robber. That would be somebody who's trying to steal away the sheep, right? Not somebody who's trying to become one of the sheep. The one who enters the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name, and this part's important, and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them. Okay, here's where our picture of the sheep pen as the nation of Israel starts to make sense. In a first century sheep pen, it was not uncommon to have more than one flock together, just sort of milling about or being protected in the pen. But when an individual shepherd came to collect his sheep, he would just call out to them. The sheep that were his would recognize the voice and come out. The others would stay in. And so what we've got here is a picture of Jesus coming before the nation of Israel and calling out his sheep. He's calling those who are going to believe in him and go on to become Christians. And we know that when that actually happened, when the new covenant was established, some Jews did become Christians and did follow Jesus, but many, maybe most, did not. And so most of the sheep stayed back in the sheep pen, but some recognized the shepherd's voice and came out and followed him. And that actually works. This fits pretty well with this. This interpretation fits pretty well with this passage here, I think. And really, if we continue on reading, as we get further along, we'll confirm that this is indeed probably the best interpretation here. Let's skip down to verse 16, and now I think all this stuff will make sense. Jesus says here, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. So Jesus right here, very clearly now, here he's talking about the Gentiles. Judaism was an exclusive thing. It was an ethnicity as well as being a religion. And yes, you could join. There were pathways to do that. But by and large, it was a family affair, and it got really, really big over time. But with the new covenant, when that came along, the ethnicity part was de-emphasized. Now, to be clear, the Bible talks about future plans that God has for Israel, and that's a real thing. There's prophecy that has yet to come true, but we're excited about that, and we hope to see that fulfilled in the near future. But in the meantime, we know that Gentiles have been grafted into the promise, and we can read about that in other places in the Bible. But right here, Jesus tells us plain as day, he has other sheep. He's talking about us. He's talking about the Gentiles. We're not of that sheep pen. We're not Jews, but we're still Jesus's sheep. He lays down his life for his sheep. He says he must bring them also, bring us also. We listen to his voice. And then he says, like we've already mentioned, this profound thing in the first century, there will be one flock and only one shepherd for us all. Hope that clears things up a little bit. Hope it's been helpful, and I hope it's been interesting. And until next time, Lord willing, there is a next time. May God bless you and your family.